Welcome everyone, and thanks for watching. Most of you will already be aware of this build, as it was recently featured in Season 11 of GGG's Build of the Week series, but in this very first video on my channel, we'll be taking a closer look at my Echosphere Inquisitor. Eben and the team did a great job with their showcase, so check it out if you'd like a quick cinematic overview of the core interactions. The positive reception to their video was great to see. A quick disclaimer before we begin. The build tends towards meme territory. 10 million DPS and a safe playstyle means that it can tackle some of the hardest endgame content, as we'll see, but it's too convoluted and clunky for the meta. Consider this more of a showcase than a guide, and enjoy the absurdity. I played it, so you don't have to. I'll be showcasing endgame encounters like Simulacrum and the Feared after explaining the build, so you can use video chapters to skip ahead if that's what you're looking for. For now though, let's begin with the mechanics. The cornerstone of the build is Plume of Pursuit. The helmet significantly hampers the damage of non-critical strikes and prevents all spells from dealing crits, except for the final repeat when linked with Spell Echo, which will always crit. In isolation, this effectively causes Spell Echo to grant guaranteed crits at the cost of 10% less damage and 23% less cast speed, while taking the spot of a regular support gem. To make the most of Plume's upside, we need a skill with a specific set of properties. It needs to deal damage with hits over duration so that our DPS doesn't depend on cast speed. It can't rely on having multiple casts active at once, like Brand's, because we can't avoid producing the useless first cast. The damage dealt over that duration must inherit the properties of the final repeat, unlike Blade Vortex, and it must be supportable by Spell Echo, removing options like Tornado. The only skill that currently meets this criteria is Hydrosphere. Casting Hydrosphere moves and refreshes the duration of the sphere, which then pulses, damaging any enemy it passed through recently. With Spell Echo, the repeat leaves the sphere in place and makes it pulse again. If we hit the sphere and apply freeze or shock, it will pulse at regular intervals, and each pulse inherits the properties of the most recent cast, so we can fully capitalize on that final repeat. To start, Divergent Spell Echo takes the gem from 10% less to 12% more damage for the final repeat. We're also looking for large sources of critical strike multiplier, but most sources on the passive tree are inefficient because they include crit chance, which we don't need, so we'll look to items instead. The quintessential item for this is Marilene's Fallacy, which grants a massive 288 crit multi, as well as Culling Strike, which is effectively 11% more damage. Since we're guaranteed to crit, we can ignore its significant downside. Sanctum League introduced the Winds of Fate, a new staff which synergizes perfectly with the setup so far. It grants 100 crit multi, as well as incredibly high base damage, which we can take advantage of with Battle Mage as an Inquisitor. Hydrosphere deals base physical damage, so the added damage benefits from all of our conversion and scaling, more than doubling our damage. And again, we get to ignore all of the potential downsides of the item. Our initial cast now deals no damage, but we're focused on the final repeat anyways, and Plume of Pursuit ignores crit chance, so the cap doesn't matter. The damage conversion is concerning at first, but conversion granted by skill and support gems takes priority over other sources like passives or gear. And Hydrosphere has 100% conversion built in, so the Winds of Fate conversion does nothing. Altogether, this puts us at nearly 550 crit multi without any nodes on the passive tree, freeing up those points for defenses, area of effect, and other damage scaling. With the Plume dream fully realized, we just need to deal with the issue of enabling Hydrosphere's pulses. Let the jank begin. While clearing, most enemies will die to the pulse created by moving the sphere, but for single target, the bulk of the damage will be from the repeated pulses. To enable them, we can either shock or freeze the sphere, though I prefer freeze because cold conversion builds have better scaling options, and freeze offers a significant defensive bonus. Regardless of our choice, ailment sources like proliferation and ground effects won't affect Hydrosphere, so we have to apply it with a hit, which presents a major problem. Ailments are based on the damage of the hit, but our initial cast of any spell deals no damage, so we have to apply them with the final repeat. But Hydrosphere can only be hit once every second. For almost every spell, the first cast will hit before the repeat, dealing no damage, applying no ailment, and leaving the sphere on cooldown when the repeat arrives. Thankfully, Wave of Conviction has some interesting mechanics that we can abuse. The spell can only have one wave active at a time, so the repeat will cut the first wave short. We can freeze the sphere by placing it far enough away that the first wave won't reach it, but the second will. And we can widen that margin by increasing cast speed to cancel the first wave sooner, or increasing skill effect duration to let the repeat travel further. The freeze duration is based on the damage of the hit, which should be easy to max out because Wave of Conviction deals base physical damage, benefiting from all the same tech as Hydrosphere. But we have an issue. Wave of Conviction converts 25% to lightning and 25% to fire, letting Winds of Fate randomly convert the rest. We could get enough damage to freeze the sphere with a bit of extra cold conversion, but if Hydrosphere is both frozen and shocked, it will split its damage between cold and lightning, which would make damage scaling difficult. So we need to avoid shocking the sphere, and with lightning conversion built into the gem, one of the only ways to do this is Avatar of Fire, which prevents any non-fire damage. The conversion chain has become a bit absurd though, so let's review. Hydrosphere starts with pure physical damage, converting fully to cold through gem conversion, ignoring both Avatar of Fire and Winds of Fate. 50% of that cold is converted to fire, and we can complete that conversion with cold to fire support, which also serves as a 29% damage multiplier. Wave of Conviction also starts with pure physical damage, converting 25% to both lightning and fire through gem conversion. The remaining 50% is shared between Avatar of Fire and Winds of Fate, converting 17% to fire, 8% to chaos, and 25% to a random element. Then Avatar of Fire converts half of the initial 25% as lightning and half of the random element to fire, if it wasn't already. That leaves us with no less than 2/3 of Wave's damage as fire, regardless of the random conversion, which is more than enough to freeze the sphere. Just one small problem. Fire damage can't freeze either. Expedition's End is the final piece of the puzzle, letting fire damage freeze, as well as boosting freeze duration and chilling nearby enemies. With that, the build can function, but it feels extremely clunky with slow cast speed, high mana costs, and mediocre coverage. I almost didn't notice because the mechanic is so neglected, but the stars have aligned to make Fanaticism a reasonable solution. Fanaticism is a buff exclusive to Inquisitor, which grants 75% more cast speed, increased area of effect, and reduced mana cost. Everything we need. And since we're already taking Instruments of Virtue for Battle Mage, we're already in place to pick up Instruments of Zeal. The reason it doesn't see use is that attacking once per second to acquire it interrupts your casting uptime, which is what it's meant to buff. But in this case, our DPS isn't based on cast speed, so we aren't losing anything by weaving in some quick attacks between casts to move or freeze the sphere. The typical approach to maintain Fanaticism is to use an attack-based movement skill. We're using a staff, so our only option would be Leap Slam, but getting enough attack speed for that to feel reasonable would be tough. And even with high attack speed, being forced to move every second makes gameplay feel frantic and would often conflict with our casts. Instead, we can abuse channeling skills and animation canceling with Cyclone. For Instruments of Zeal, an entire channel of Cyclone counts as a single attack, which happens the moment you begin channeling. Interestingly, you can cancel a channeling skill's animation even before the first action occurs, so we could Cyclone for 1 frame and have it count as an attack. And since Cyclone lets you continue moving while channeling, the only downside is the extra button presses. Obviously, we live in a 1-button meta, but I hope it's clear by this point that we've left the meta behind. Every good meme build needs a bit of jank. But with the main mechanics finally in place, let's see what we can do to round the build out. Hydrosphere pulses every 0.4 seconds by default, but this can be increased through the pulse frequency stat. The only 2 sources of this are 10% from gem quality and 30% from a helmet enchant. Together, these offer 40% more damage, so it's important to get both, which will almost certainly require paying for a lab service. With Ashes of the Stars, we could push it to a total of 55%, but losing nearly 300 crit multi and Calling Strike makes it a downgrade overall. For support gems, we're linking Hydrosphere with Divergent Spell Echo to enable Plume, Cold to Fire to complete Avatar Fire's conversion, Awaken Fire Pen and Concentrated Effect for damage, and Awaken Controlled Destruction, which offers a great damage multiplier and Unnerve, while we ignore its huge penalty to crit chance. In addition to providing 15% fire exposure, Wave of Conviction buffs our damage with both Combustion and Arcane Surge. Both of these also offer more damage to the wave itself, which is important to maximize freeze duration. Awakened Unbound Ailments contributes there as well, bringing our total freeze duration up to around 12 seconds, and faster casting helps widen the margin to hit Hydrosphere. For auras, we can do a lot thanks to a Helmet Corruption and some aura passives. Since Hydrosphere is fully converting from Fizz to Cold to Fire, we can benefit from damage multipliers to any of those types, and use Gain as extra modifiers to multiply damage further. Herald of Ash, Herald of Purity, and Hatred all fit the bill, and we can use Taste of Hate for a bit extra. In addition to some freeze duration, Polaric Devastation offers the Covered in Ash debuff, which causes increased fire damage taken, stacking with Unnerve and Inquisitor's Sanctuary node to provide up to 45% more damage. We'll also be getting a ton of regen as an Inquisitor, so we can run Petrified Blood and reserve some auras in the top half of our life pool to enable Pain Attunement for 30% more damage. All that regen will also be enough to oversustain Righteous Fire for another 40% more. Speaking of regen, all this damage won't help if we're dead, so defensive layers are important too. As an Inquisitor, Pious Path doubles our life regen onto our energy shield, so we'll be running hybrid life and ES, taking nodes which scale both on the passive tree. Using Corrupted Soul from Glorious Vanity splits damage taken between life and ES, so we benefit from regen to both at once. Glorious Vanity also converts nearby notables, so we can grab fire damage leached as life, which can be hard to come by, as well as some ES leech from a mastery. Just like with regen, Corrupted Soul lets us benefit from leech as life and ES at once. And by ensuring that our auras leave just over half of our life unreserved, Petrified Blood will prevent that life leech from taking us to full and expiring early, making it much more reliable. Elemental ailments can be nullified with Storm Shroud and chance to avoid shock on boot implicits and an Abyss Jewel. And with ailment immunity, Lethe Shade offers strong defense against damage over time when we're not using Righteous Fire. Stun immunity is also pretty important to avoid missing our repeats, so I've grabbed Unwavering Stance. Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels offer a few interesting options from Guardian, but I've gone with Templar's special Searing Purity node, which converts 90% of chaos damage taken to fire and lightning, letting me skimp on chaos resistance and focus the rest of my rare gear on life, armor, LE res, and regen. To finish things off, a fair amount of armor can be gained through a combination of Determination, Flasks, a Watcher's Eye, and Molten Shell. Across the rest of the tree, we'll grab some increased damage as well as cast speed and area of effect for quality of life, including an incredibly valuable Unnatural Instinct placement. But now, let's see how it plays. Having left enough mana unreserved to cast either Hydrosphere or Wave of Conviction, the build can technically get going without Fanaticism, but the goal is to maintain it at all times to keep things responsive. We have to be careful though, as the wording on Instruments of Zeal is a bit deceiving. It says that we'll gain a charge every second, so long as we've attacked in the past second, so you might think it'd be enough to have attacked within a second of gaining your last charge. In reality, your first attack starts a 1-second timer. For as long as that timer is running, you will gain a charge every second thereafter, and every time you attack, the timer's duration is reset. So, if our attacks are ever more than 1 second apart, the charge cadence will slip and start again 1 second after the most recent attack, even if that attack occurred before the next charge was supposed to arrive. My approach is to tap spacebar for Cyclone slightly more than once a second, and to quickly tap it before casting each spell. It sounds annoying, but it actually becomes fairly rhythmic. I found it helpful to play music with around 70 or 140 beats per minute to tap along with. Unsurprisingly, a few tracks from Crypta the Necrodancer worked great, but to each their own. In order to keep Hydrosphere pulsing, I try to hit it with a wave every 10 seconds or so, or when an easy opportunity presents itself. It can be a bit cumbersome to cast the sphere far enough ahead of you when clearing tight layouts, but Fanaticism actually grants enough cast speed to cast Wave of Conviction first, and then cast Hydrosphere to pull it through the wave from behind. Remember that Hydrosphere will drench enemies it passes through for around 5 seconds. When it pulses, it damages drenched enemies in a screen-wide area of effect, so we can drag it around like an eraser while it freezes and kills previous packs. For bosses, all we have to do is tag the boss and the sphere with Wave of Conviction every 4 or 5 seconds, and then play safe from a distance, much like totems. I tend to leave Regisfire off while clearing to benefit from higher regen and Lethe Shade, and turn it on for bosses where the damage really counts. And on the topic of bosses, let's wrap up and see what the build can do in the endgame. At the end of the day, this was a science project that fell down a rabbit hole of janky interactions, so I was shocked to see how capable it turned out to be. I managed to take down all the endgame bosses, all of Maven's invitations rolled to 80%, and all 30 waves of Simulacrum. I even managed to kill Uber, Cirrus, and Cortex, having never tried either before. But the build also demonstrated the importance of some mechanics that I'd underrated. In tough clearing content like 100% Delirious maps or the final Simulacrum waves, it was very valuable to have DPS that is unconditional, screen wide, and hands off. The build tops out at 10 million DPS for single target, which is low compared to many meta builds, but it has almost no difference fighting one enemy or 100 and gives you time to dodge. The value of freeze also can't be overstated as a defensive layer. With a consistent, hard-hitting skill and all the freeze duration I took for quality of life, most enemies touched by the ball are permanently frozen, giving us lots of breathing room in fights. Boss arenas with area denial like Maven and the Feared are made much easier. Between freeze and the hands-off nature of Hydrosphere, we can maintain full DPS from across the arena and focus on staying mobile. Altogether, the build cost me just under 45 divines when I built it 3 to 4 weeks into the league, including luxuries like Awakened Gems and perfect rolls in some cases, although the prices of some items like Expedition's End have spiked since then. Trimming away nice-to-haves like Awakened Gems and Unnatural Instinct, I'm confident the build could have been built for less than 20 divines. But to reiterate, I wouldn't suggest trying to replicate this one. If you're looking for a more sane take on Hydrosphere, be sure to check out Arrow, who's done a good job of popularizing the skill recently. I'll include a link to his channel in the description. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed the absurdity. If you thought this showcase was cool, share it with a friend who might like it too. I'll be pursuing new nonsense in 321, so until then, have a good one.